All right.
Hello, Emily.
Hello.
Wanted to make sure we're connected and there's no issues.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I am trying something new where I actually have two cameras, which is just
You're so
thrilling.
fancy.
I know, right? It's the dream.
It is nice because then you kind of get it gives you a place to cut away to or something
Hmm.
to give you movement.
Well,
Um,
one thing I noticed, because I did a few live streams last year, is that when you use Google Meet, like it switches between the two constantly.
mhm.
Or it doesn't if there's only one other person. And so like what I've got set up is I'll just show you because the wonders of technology. Oh, you can't see that because that camera goes to the live stream. So I'm on one side of the screen and you're on the other side. So it's
Gotcha. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, so
yeah,
you get to see both people simultaneously. How nice.
yeah, yeah. It's yeah.
Oh, I didn't bring a copy. Oh, yeah, I do have a copy of my book over here. I was like, wait, did
That's
I
okay.
even?
I still have my librarian
Okay,
copy right
perfect.
here.
Perfect. Yay.
Yeah. So how are things going?
I'm good. I mean, the move is definitely an adjustment, you know. I mean,
Hmm.
we've lived in Santa Monica for, oh God, like, I mean, I've been in Los Angeles as a whole for like 19 years.
Oh,
So
okay.
longer than I'd been in the Pacific Northwest where I was born and raised.
Yeah.
And so, but anyway, LA had kind of run its course for us. We definitely are like more outdoorsy people.
Hmm.
It's just too expensive.
It really
Yeah,
is. Yeah.
it was just unsustainable. Oh, let me shut that off so that doesn't ding. I forgot about that. Anyway, and so it got to the point where we were like, where would we be happiest? So we kind of looked everywhere. Looked in Colorado. We looked out in Arizona. We looked into different parts of California.
Hmm.
Still expensive. Spoilers.
Yeah.
Um, and then a couple of my friends, I have good friends that live out in Austin. They're like, "You're gonna love it here. Come out." So we visited a few times. We'd been out here, obviously, a ton before that,
Hmm.
and then yeah, decided to make the move. We looked for about a year and a half, and then yeah. So
Okay.
it's been a transition, but it's been great. We got a puppy. She's super
Oh,
cute.
congratulations.
Oh,
Puppies are great.
thanks. They are. They're a lot of work, but they're totally great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So other than that, I mean, it's just been work, and the pandemic stress is definitely like wearing on me. It has off and on throughout the
Hmm.
year and a half. But how about you? How are you? You're gonna be a dad?
I am. I
That's
am.
so exciting.
It's
Congratulations.
thank you. It's very exciting. It's a little nerve-wracking, but I
Of
mean,
course.
parenthood, I guess that's just kind of the
In
state of
life
things.
change, right? Anything that has us changing our lifestyle or our behaviors is going to be hard.
Yeah.
While it's also wonderful.
Right. Right. I am just getting everything set up and I'm getting a link to share so that folks can actually find this. But I think I said it live. Hello, if anyone's watching, because that's how we do actually. If you are watching, please stand by. We're just gonna do a quick little thing and move one thing to another place.
Oh,
Tabs.
technology.
Yeah, right. I tell you. Okay,
Hmm.
so F11 again. I got all the framing squared away. Just gonna put a little thing on the tweet verse. Live stream with
I'll get in and retweet it here.
Katie Morton. There you are. As we talk about her new book, Traumatized. And then Control X, Control V. I was in a conference earlier today because of the magic of technology letting conferences be remote, which is a real treat. And so like getting everything adjusted from those settings is also a fun
Oh,
little
yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we're good. Did I actually tweet that? I did. Okay. Okay. Oh, and we've
There
got
we go. I
nobody
see.
yet, but that's fine.
Let me retweet you.
Sure.
Boom. Okay. There we go.
All
Okay.
right.
We're ready.
I think we're ready. Yeah. All right. So, I think we're just gonna jump into it. Uh, hello,
Hi. So good to see you.
Likewise, likewise. So everybody, this is me, Peter. Hello, how you doing? This is Stacks and Facts, as always. And today we have a returning visitor. We've got Katie Morton, licensed family and
Marriage and
LMFT,
family
right?
therapist.
Licensed marriage and family therapist, and host of the YouTube channel, the Eponymous YouTube channel. I think Katie Morton.
Correct.
And today we are going to be talking about this excellent book that she just came out with called Traumatized. I figure it is an appropriate thing to talk about given everywhere that we're at right now. So I figured, yeah. Katie, do you want to introduce yourself? Anything I missed?
Oh no, you did a great job. I've been creating content on YouTube, educational mental health content for over 10 years, and this is my second book, which is why I'm a return guest.
Yes, yes. The last one that you were here for was Are You Okay? And that was great. We talked about that back in June of last year, back when the pandemic was like still getting started and we had no idea of like how
Yeah, what was to come.
yeah. Ooh, what a year. What a year and a half.
Right? It's weird. I was talking to someone the other day and we're like, it simultaneously feels like time has stood still and also moved incredibly quick. And that, I don't know, that like, it's very dysregulating, I guess.
It is. Yeah, and being one of the various YouTubers, the educational YouTubers that are out here, someone posted a video about the weird psychology of time during the pandemic, way when it first started happening. I was like, this is great. And I'll have to Braincraft, Vanessa Hill.
Oh, she's so good. Yeah.
I loved it. It was great. And I was like, okay, good. As long as I'm not the only person feeling this, I'll take it.
Well, that's the thing. It's so nice to know you're not alone in feeling. That's why I say dysregulated, because it's like overwhelmed
Yeah.
and sad and then frustrated and tired. Yeah.
Yeah. But now that we are into this a year and a half or so, I feel like your book is super timely. One thing that I've been thinking about a lot over the past year, but really starting around last November, December, because I was noticing it for myself, is that we are in a very traumatic period. And like, I think it was kind of hard when it first started hitting me, like occurring to me that was the case, because like so many aspects of life just felt normal. Not like normal, but like, oh, well, but I'm not being abused. No one's neglecting me. Nobody's like, everyone's being really friendly, all of these things. But at the same time, like, when we think about what we are used to, that was not what we were used to.
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah. And like, I guess it comes to the idea, and you defined it earlier in the book about like what it means to be traumatized, or what is trauma. And I think you mentioned something around how it's like when we experience something that is beyond our ability to cope.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's really important for people to understand this, because we always think of trauma as like these big events. Like you said, like I'm not being abused, like these horrific things aren't happening to me, especially those of us who are fortunate to not have lost anyone to COVID or had anything, horrific happen. But we're forgetting all of the other ways that it can be too much, right?
Yeah.
For a lot of people, it's job loss. That's what we call so big T traumas are, I went to war, I was abused as a kid, I was in this car crash, like something that just comes into our life and sweeps us away, right? It's like overwhelming. And we immediately, within like a few months, have symptoms of PTSD, struggle with that. Little T traumas are things that kind of build up and slowly wash us out to sea, like pull us out into the depths of PTSD. And those are things like job loss. Those are things like divorce, moving a lot as a kid, being bullied for a short period of time. There are so many ways that we can be traumatized, where normally we'd say, well, that was just tough or whatever. But I like to think of our resilience, our ability to cope, as like a bag filled with poker chips. And every time something happens, it costs us some, right? So like, if someone's really rude to me on the street and I hold it together and I don't react, I don't cry, I don't let it ruin the rest of my day, that might cost me 2, maybe 3 of my poker chips, right? And you can see how if we don't do things to replenish it, meaning taking care of ourselves, and a lot of our things that we did to take care of ourselves were taken from us in the pandemic. Like I used to love going to my yoga studio. I used to love going out to dinner with my friends and catching up. I used to love to, I mean, there were so many things that Sean and I used to do that were shut down in our city for a really long time. And so all of that was removed. So I wasn't getting to hoard my poker chips like I used to, like building up my savings account of them.
Yeah.
Yet I was paying them out every day. And so I think I even said this in the book, but I would estimate that each and every one of us has been traumatized this year, like worldwide,
Yeah.
because of the pandemic.
Yeah, and that was actually when I first reached out to you. It was, I kind of talked about this in the email I sent you. Like, yeah, we're all traumatized, and I don't think we all quite realize it. Kind of like how we were talking about earlier. Like, it wasn't big T trauma; it was little T trauma, but like it was everybody. And like I had noticed that working as a librarian because, well, first of all, we shut down completely. And I lost my job. I was unemployed for like about 2 or 3 months.
And that's scary.
Super scary, yeah. And then like eventually we got called back, but it was a very different experience being in this place where we were so used to having the public come in and be like interacting with people because we didn't have the public come in. We were doing a bunch of remote services. And then eventually when we did reopen to the public, it was always at this arm's length, and we had like plexiglass barriers between us and them, and we had to wear masks and all of these things, and like it was so out of the norm. And so especially for somebody who really prides himself in like providing really not intimate but like really caring service to others, like suddenly having these walls up between myself and the people I'm trying to help was very hard and took a lot of time to get used to. And like,
Yeah. And I even almost hate that we have to get used to it.
yeah,
Because that connection is so vital to us being human. I think too often we think like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Like, again, we minimize our experience.
Yeah.
That wasn't that traumatizing. It's not that overwhelming. But really, I think more and more now what people are experiencing is the isolation or the lack of connectivity and the ripple effects of that. Like I've heard more and more online how lonely people are feeling.
yeah,
And trying to find that sense of community is just difficult now because we used to be able to, I mean, a lot of things have reopened, but for some people, they're like, I used to go to church and that's how I'd interact with people. My church has been closed for a long time and now it's remote services. I used to go to the library and chat it up with Peter and now I can't,
yeah,
and that stuff is, even though I know we can think, oh, it's not that big of a deal and we can minimize, it is a big deal and it affects us. And I want everybody to know, like, it's okay to feel that way. And I've been feeling it too. And off and on, I go through these like grieving stages of like, I'm really sad. And then sometimes I'm like mad. and then I feel like hopeless for a while. And then I come back out of it,
yeah, for sure. So, let's talk about the book a little bit.
Yes.
We are in a pandemic. And is it a coincidence that you, like, did you start writing the book before the pandemic happened, or, because you do reference it in the book, which is like, how can one not?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost ironic, really. I don't even know what word to fully use, but we had sold the book idea. So for anybody who doesn't understand like the book process, especially for nonfiction, I know fiction can be a little bit different, but for a nonfiction writer, you put together a proposal. And the proposal is like a breakdown of chapters and things you really want to cover. And you go to try to sell that. For me, it was, we were going back to my same editor in the same publishing house. But for other people, you might be going out trying to find somebody else to love the book as much as you do, or the book idea, right? I put the proposal together and we actually sold the book idea in October of 2019. And then I began writing maybe 2 months before the pandemic, probably at the end of January, beginning of February, maybe. And then when that happened, about 2-3 weeks into the pandemic, my editor called and he was like, we can't not include this. We need to go back and rework some of the chapters. And so the first chapter that I'd written originally now isn't until chapter 2, and things just got kind of pushed and moved around. And I tried to incorporate as much of the pandemic, honestly, because it was front of mind too, because at that point, then we were all going through it. And so, yeah, it was kind of by happenstance that it happened to be coming out at this time.
Yeah, okay. It's always fun to kind of hear how the process of books coming out happens, because I think it's one of those things that kind of people don't really understand. When you were, I guess, Well, I had prepared questions in my brain, and then I forgot to take them from up here and put them down here.
That's okay. That's okay.
One of the questions I had, so when I read through the book, I incidentally had been reading several books at the same time, but I noticed that your book, that Traumatized, is very linear. Is that how you intended for folks to read it, like from start to finish, or kind of jump
I
around?
think I call it's almost like a side effect of being on YouTube for too long.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's the way that my brain works when I put content together in general, because, there's a beginning of the video, a middle, and an end. And I always, even with Are You Okay? It was a little less linear because it wasn't on the same topic, but it still starts with like explanations and understandings and then moves toward treatment and healing. And
Mm-hmm.
Traumatized kind of does the same, takes the same path. And I think because we read books from, not everybody reads books from start to finish, but this isn't a workbook, so you
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't just like toggle in. It is linear, although I do hope that people can pop in for one chapter, take the key takeaways or things, and move on with that. If they don't need, let's say they don't really care about transgenerational trauma or how it's passed, they might want to just jump into, how do I find the right treatment?
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, and one thing that I really liked about how you wrote it is you don't use you. You use we a lot,
Mm-hmm.
or like you use I. And I feel like that's really helpful. I'm guessing that was intentional, like when you're talking about feeling symptoms of trauma or like different stress responses. Um, can you talk about maybe why you use language that way?
Yeah, I mean, in general, as a therapist, I was trained to not use you. It feels very judgmental. It feels like pointy finger,
Mm-hmm.
right? When you feel, because I would never feel that. It feels, in a way, to me, just not very therapeutic.
Mm-hmm.
And I find especially when it comes to trauma, like so many of us have different experiences. I find we to just be more inclusive,
Mm-hmm.
less judgmental, and therefore just reminding people over and over through language that they're not alone. Because the numbers of people who've been traumatized, I mean, it's just, like I said, I think we all have been at this point. And so that's really, and I do that on my channel as well. And I think it's just the inclusivity of it is very important to me.
Awesome. Is there, just thinking about general questions, like, is there part of writing the book that really stood out to you or that like really sticks with you?
Different parts. So the chapter about, I forget, I think it's chapter 9. I'd have to look here real quick, but the chapter about your brain and trauma memories.
Oh yeah.
Um, Chapter 9, yeah. Why
Mm-hmm.
do we feel so scared? That was, I had to read a lot and research a lot for that, and then reread things, because I'm not a neuroscientist or a
Yeah.
neurologist. It was all, I had the therapeutic knowledge
Mm-hmm.
of like why memories are hard to recall, but I didn't know where they were stored in the brain or where they think they come from and why it's hard to pull them. All that stuff was really fascinating for me,
Mm-hmm.
and probably took the longest to write. And then, other chapters like building resilience, because I felt like I'd talked about it throughout the book, it was kind of hard but fun, like creatively, for me to try to come up with new ways and new things to get people thinking about their resilience and building that up.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so those two chapters definitely were like standouts. And then I think the last one, really, because I knew it, but I hadn't. Sometimes there's things that you're like, oh, duh, but I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah.
And that was the transgenerational trauma. I mean, we've
Mm-hmm.
talked about it and I know it, like I said, logically, I know it. But then whenever I write, I try to like find some of my own stories to share if I have them. I don't always have them, but
Yeah.
I shared a story about my great grandma because I was fortunate enough to be alive when she was still alive. She didn't pass away till I was 11 or 12. And she grew up in the Great Depression, and she would like hoard things. And we'd go out to dinner and she would put like a salt and pepper shaker in her purse and take all the rolls and like any leftover, everything came home. And I found it so embarrassing. But looking back, I'm like, no, she was traumatized. She was afraid she wouldn't be able to feed herself.
Mm-hmm.
And there was plenty here. So I'm going to take it home in case. Always that in case. And so anyway, that was really fascinating to dig into in a new way, and it forced me to look back at my life in different ways. And I always enjoy the reflection part of writing.
For sure. Um, when we are thinking about this, I was looking at the chapter list, um, and trying to think about like conversations that we have had kind of sporadically, like because it took me a while to read the book. One thing that really stood out to me was when I was reading that like it was really nice to see trauma discussed in a way like little t trauma. I feel like that doesn't get a lot of coverage in the general discussion, and I think that that's kind of a big thing now for us as a society, because I think in a scale that we haven't seen before, like we said before, everybody's traumatized. What do you think are some good ways, just maybe, looking at the book, what are some like triage? What are some trauma triage techniques that you can think of?
I mean, first, I guess the first part of anything is just awareness. Mm-hmm. So I encourage journaling a lot. And I know my audience members are like, please stop talking about it. What if I don't like to do it? There's other options. But I think journaling allows us a window inside, because so often we can just go through life like disconnected. It can feel safer. It can be easier. I can do more when I'm not, in my head all day, right? And I get that. And there's a time and a place for disconnection, so that we can distract and get through or calm our system down enough to actually do the journaling. Mm-hmm. But journaling is a great way to help us understand where we're at and what's going on in our head, because trauma really feeds, just like any mental illness, it really feeds on this like negative self-talk or false beliefs about ourselves and our situation. These can be things like, I'm so stupid, I'm so lazy, that wasn't that big of a deal, I'm overreacting, or anything also like, I'm not lovable, right? Everybody always comes into my life, wants to hurt me. We can have these beliefs that are born out of some facts sometimes, but it's almost like we've turned a molehill into a mountain through repeating this thought without acknowledging it. And I could really dig into like why it's helpful and stuff, but journaling is just a great place to start. If someone's looking for a way to improve their life, try journaling for 5 minutes for a week and notice. And if you don't know where to start, you don't have to like, dear diary, today I got up and, we don't have to do that. Yeah. But you can jot down 2 things you're grateful for, 2 things you're looking forward to, and 2 things you're working on. And that just kind of sometimes can set up our day or end our day in just a reflective moment. So that's a good way to like check in. Nice. And, I'm trying to think of like, because it's funny to think of it as triage, like what would you want to do first? Mm-hmm. And if you have any physical manifestations that you think might be coming from trauma, please go see your doctor. Mm-hmm. I always tell my patients, I know that's very triage sounding, but we want to make sure that something else isn't going on. Like for instance, my mom thought she had panic attacks and anxiety for years and was taking medication for that and seeing a therapist. Turns out she had AFib or atrial fibrillation. And once she had the surgery to fix that, she's like, I still do feel kind of anxious, but they cut her medication in half for that. Mm-hmm. She doesn't, it's like, she should have, they should have considered that and said like, oh, that could cause racing heart, make you feel a little faint, which she thought were panic attacks. Mm-hmm. And anyway, so get checked out, see a doctor just to make sure there's nothing else going on that could be causing it. And I guess the final thing that I like for a way to help yourself now is reach out for friends and other supports in your life. I love for people to reach out to see a therapist, but I know that's not always possible. And I know it's not always available, or it could be too expensive. There's a lot of different, reasons that it can be difficult, but please do it. But if you can't, having friend and family support is good. And there's lots of free online groups, and Hope for Recovery is a great online resource for free groups. They're also raising money right now, and I just love them. I've donated my time to that organization. They do a great job. Yeah. Do you feel like that's enough for triaging?
Oh, yeah. I'm just going to take a quick look and see how things are going. If anyone is currently watching, let us know in the chat. Feel free to drop any questions. I'll occasionally look at it, and we will discuss those. When you were writing Traumatized, who did you imagine your audience for this book?
My viewers. I mean, there's a lot of people out there in my community that I talk to through Patreon. I do hangouts and we do live streams and stuff. So I feel like I really know a lot of them. Mm-hmm. And they're the real reason that this book came to be in the first place, because through my time online, I just realized how common, like the common thread, right? So I specialize, if anybody doesn't know, I specialize in the treatment of eating disorders and self-injury. And I do a lot of what is known as dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, which for lack of a better term is essentially CBT, where you track your thoughts and the feelings that you have about those thoughts, and then the actions you take as a result. We try to work on those. it's like that, but then DBT adds in a little component of emotion regulation and mindfulness. So just being a little bit more aware. So anyways, I don't specialize in trauma, but even in my practice, working with patients with eating disorder, self-injury, talking to people online about it, getting to know my community, there was always this thread of trauma. And because I'd had all these conversations and they so lovingly gave their stories, there's tons of viewer stories in there.
Yeah, there are.
And those are the people I imagine myself talking to. It was just the ones that I already do.
Awesome. I'm kind of jumping around, but one of the things that I really liked about the book is you do mention a variety of different kind of therapy options that are out there. And the one that kind of stuck with me is somatic therapy. So I had heard of it, and I know people who have undergone somatic therapy, and I know some folks who are somatic therapists, but like up until I actually had a book to sit down with and spend time and like read about, I like honestly I was like, sure.
Yeah.
Like I somewhere in my brain I understand that there is a mind-body connection, but like that much, I don't know. But
yeah, it sounds a little woo-woo.
Yeah, but like because it was a book format, and the thing I love about books is that you really have a captive audience, right? Whoever's reading they can turn away, but it's like they have to spend time with the words. It gave me a chance to really evaluate what somatic therapy is and kind of understand it. And like you go out of your way to do a bit of research and explain like, here's what it is and here's how I know about it. I thought it was also interesting in the process of doing research. So I'd mentioned my email to you asking about this video. Like I started writing my own script about trauma and quickly realized there was so much to talk about. But in the process of doing my research for that, I found that when it comes to trauma work, there's a lot of like somatic therapy, like that takes up a lot of the space. Can you think of like why that is, or?
Yeah, I mean, especially after doing all the research for the book, and because I'm not a somatic experiencing practicing therapist.
Right.
I have some friends and colleagues who are, but I think it's because there's two parts to it. So number one, I think it's because I have to agree with Dr. Peter Levine, the psychologist who came up with somatic experiencing, that trauma's born out of freeze. And that freeze state, I know a lot of people might be thinking, well, I ran away from it and I'm still traumatized. There's a moment where we encounter hopelessness. And that freeze, that feeling of hopeless and helplessness that comes along with trauma, either when it's happening or after, is where PTSD thrives. It's like, I don't know, what's that stuff that helps your plants grow like crazy? Like Miracle Grow. Yeah, it's like Miracle Grow for PTSD. And so I have to acknowledge that in that research that Peter Levine did. And so that's part of it. So freeze, I think, is where it's born from. And then the second is, how do we unfreeze our system? There can be a lot of ways that we can do it therapeutically, where we try to tap into feelings. But the thing that I hear from my audience over and over again is, what feelings? What do you mean? I can't tap into them. I've been disconnected for years. And so the movement really gives people a way to move through the things that they might not be able to do logically, which is also really great, because I always am very cautious to not over intellectualize things, because we can get into that place where we just try to make sense of everything, and some things don't make sense. That's life, right? And so anyway, I really think somatic experiencing is super beneficial because of that, because also going back to that chapter I was talking about, the trauma memories and why sometimes they're not even there. They're not fully formed. Our body remembers, right? And so sometimes if we don't have a full memory, we can instead work through the physical manifestations of it and move that out. And I think that gives hope to some people who maybe didn't think it could get better. And I think that's really, really cool.
Awesome. Yeah, same. Like the idea that incorporating, and I guess it makes sense because like doctors always talk about like exercise is good for you, and like it is generally quite good for you. And it's that idea of flooding your body, like getting your body moving, and then that floods your body with things like endorphins. But to think about it like shaking loose different things in your body, like it makes sense if you're willing to give it some time to think about.
Yeah. And even I do want to add one little last tidbit is, sometimes when we've maybe been repeatedly traumatized or had something happen in our life, we can disconnect so much from our body, because even tapping into our body means that we're acknowledging that pain exists, or we can all of a sudden be flooded with the memory. And so just having someone move mindfully reconnects that a little bit. And I know people are like, well, that's really scary. Yes, trauma work is hard and it can be overwhelming, but it's always worth it.
Yeah.
And so even just doing that body shake, like the shake out I've been talking about online, just like getting that energy out, can sometimes people be surprised what it brings up for them. And it can also help us move forward when we feel kind of stuck in therapy. So anyway, I just wanted to address that like complete disconnect. And it's almost like in a way we're like sending down a line. We're like, are you still there? And it's like, yes. So it can be really helpful.
Cool. So thinking about what you were just talking about, how some people are like, what feelings? Can you think of any other challenges that people might have in terms of getting started with processing their own trauma or understanding trauma as they've experienced it?
Yeah, I think what feelings? Very common. And then the second most common is probably acknowledging that it's trauma, which I know sounds like, but we're talking about processing. But a lot of people will think, I just feel anxious and depressed, or I don't know, I'm on edge all the time. I don't really know why. And getting someone to say, yes, that happened to me. Yes, it sucked. And I think it was a trauma is really hard because, like you said, even personally, and I did this too in the pandemic, we're like, well, I'm healthy. I'm okay. I have a roof over my head. Like no one I love has passed away from this horrific, disease. So what do I have to be upset about?
Yeah.
And we do that judgment all the time. And so I think that's the hardest. And then also I do want to throw in the fact that it is difficult to find a good fit with a therapist. And we know that can be financially difficult. There can be limits on sessions, and we can run through those really quickly. I mean, I don't get into it in the book, obviously, because it's like its own book, but I definitely have a lot of frustrations and issues with not just the state's mental health care, the world.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone's broken, and people are like, oh, this is better. I'm like, sure, it's better in this way, but then they only get 6 sessions, and then you wait for a year, but then ours is super expensive. It's all messed up. Like, there's so many ways we could improve it. And maybe in the future I'll, stake a claim and do my best, but I'm not really into that stuff. So yeah. I'll just use my channel.
Cool. And if that's what gets you through and that's what kind of gets you the biggest audience, go for it, right? I remember when I think it was like the day after I met you, because it was VidCon. It was a long time ago. I remember seeing you on stage because you had given the talk about how, like, one of the things you loved about YouTube is it gave you an audience. And, like, well, as a therapist, like, it is gratifying to help 1 people or 2 people at a time. Like, the audience that something like YouTube gives you is huge. And I guess one thing that I'm always curious about is, so YouTube helps you talk to lots of people about lots of things. Kind of like, not too in depth though, right? Because each video is only so long, right? Whereas you have something like this that also helps you reach lots of people, but it might feel a little bit more intimate, more in depth, but somewhat less personal because it's not that same face-to-face thing, right? Do you have like things that you wish you could put out there in ways that you find? This isn't a very well formulated question.
No, but I get where you're going a little. So yeah.
Like, is there this missing kind of segment of folks that you would like to reach in a different way that you aren't right now?
I mean, there's always more people to reach. I also acknowledge that, like, I'm not going to be what everybody wants, right? Like different therapists for different folks. Right. And some people will be like, oh, I just don't like the way she talks about that. And that's fine. That's good. Then it knows that you like something else. Let's go find somebody else. Cause there's more therapists online now. Thank God. So, I definitely wish that I didn't have to think about something being captivating. I know that sounds ridiculous, but like YouTube is all about getting people to watch. Yeah. And then if the algorithm, like, because I can get really niche and I don't mind I actually kind of like to like dig in, which is why books are beautiful. Cause you can really I got to dig into trauma for however many hundreds of pages. It was amazing. Yeah. But YouTube, if someone doesn't like it or doesn't watch it, then they won't serve it up. And then it just like the next video won't be served up. And that algorithm kind of stinks sometimes. And for years I gave this many, talks about it. Yeah. And I just went about my way. And then, I'm hurt financially by it. And, my husband who does all the editing, he's like, we need to think a little bit more creatively, and we should try to, some people are doing really amazing things. We should try to mimic this. And overall, I just wish I didn't have to think about that. Yeah. I wish that I could just really get in the weeds with people, because I enjoy that part. And I think the way that I kind of get around that is doing live streams and answering questions and comments. And my podcast, Ask Kati Anything, I started at the beginning of the pandemic in like April. And so those are the ways I kind of do it anyways. Yeah. I guess that's been my only frustration. It allows you to reach a lot of people, but in order to do that, you have to make it really engaging. Yeah. Where I'm just engaging. Like, I just like the topic. Yeah. Yeah. I'm like, I don't really want to do like 5 ways. I just want to talk about this. Right. But you have to make it video format.
Gotta come up with the perfect thumbnail formula, and you gotta
make sure. And the title, and I don't know, I'm not good at that stuff. I didn't go to school for that.
Yeah. Don't forget to hit that bell and subscribe button. Anyways.
Right? Yeah.
Thinking about, so you talked about this just now a little bit, money. If you're comfortable, if you're not.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Compared to like your Patreon or other income revenue sources, what does this get you?
Not much at all. Yeah. I think it's funny. There is definitely a like pride in having a book, and there's something, it's my book baby. I love her so much. And so there's something so intimate about books, and I personally love books. And just the other day, Sean and I on our podcast were talking about like the Dewey Decimal System and the love as children that we had with the library, and just the smell of the library. So I love books, and I love to create them, but it's definitely not a lucrative business model for me. Because the amount of hours you put in, if I even think of just like, let's say insurance would pay me $75 an hour to see a patient back in the day, that just to give like an easy number, right? Yeah. If you counted the hours it took for this to be created, I'd definitely be in the red. But I still love that it's out, and I love that it's here.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's one thing that folks folks often underestimate, like what a book brings folks. And like, I know a little bit about it just by virtue of being a librarian, but it's always fun to put it out there. Like, people don't write books to become rich. Unless like you're Stephen
We could
King.
become, I was just going to say there's obviously those people like James Patterson or Stephen King, or even Brené Brown, I would argue within my field. I'm sure she makes mad loot on her books, because if you see New York Times bestseller, that means a lot, and obviously that's a goal of mine, because that would just be super cool, right? Who would write a book and not want that to happen? Everybody would. But yeah, unless it's that level, it's definitely not that lucrative.
Yeah, for sure. So I just saw a comment pop up from Neurotransmissions. It's either Ali or Micah.
Yes,
hey, Ali or Micah.
So good to see them.
Yeah, I love them. I'm actually working through their book they just came out with, called The Brain Explained.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And from a design point of view, I'm excited to talk to them about it. The dog is about to bark.
You could feel it coming.
Oh, I can watch her behind the camera spinning. It's comedy. So their book is beautiful. Anyways, they have a question. The question is, Peter, is my copy a library copy, so on brand? Yes, it is. So we got this. One of the joys and privileges of being a librarian is I get to buy whatever the hell book I want for my system within certain constraints. So it has to be not self-published, and it has to be new. So like within the past 2 years. And so if you find yourself living in the city that I live, or living in the city where I work, you will get all of the books ever published by YouTubers ever. And it's a real treat. Because I have a lot of friends, and I've been noticing lately that like YouTubers have been publishing a lot of books. And what I guess this is your second book, but what kind of got you into that vein?
Funny story, really. So there used to be this, there was a book that came out, and I think they had a channel together. They don't anymore, and I'm forgetting the name of it, and I apologize. But these 2 women that I knew wrote a book called This is a Book for Parents of Gay Kids. And I had met them through like a friend of a friend, and they had a YouTube channel as well. And I just fell in love with them, Kristen and Danielle, and we did some videos together. And then I met up with Kristen in New York, where she lived. She lived in Brooklyn. And she was like, you should write a book. because she's just, do you ever have those people in your life that just like are your biggest cheerleaders and get you so amped up and excited about things? She's that person, and I love her for it. And she was like, we have an amazing literary agent that helped us write our book, and I would like to introduce you. I think that, you guys would hit it off and it'd be great. And I was like, seriously? I'm like, could I write a book? That seems like a lot of work. I don't, all the self-doubt.
Right.
And then I met my literary agent, JL, who was the first ever person to be like part of my team. Like she was the first person to like believe in what I was doing and want to work with me. And we shopped. So first of all, my initial idea, not to get too into the history, but it's kind of funny to see how it changed. So I met JL, fell in love with her. She's still obviously my literary agent, and we're good friends, and we have the same taste in music, and she's just lovely. So anyway, we put together the book idea that I had was I wanted to break a book in, it's kind of funny because I see why it wouldn't work, but into chapters of issues. So like one chapter is eating disorders, one chapter is depression. And I wanted to share people's questions and my answers. I wanted to just be question and answer in this kind of Q&A format. And I would do my best to pick questions that I thought addressed, the different things. Because I have hundreds of thousands of questions I've answered over the years. And I was like, these should be going to good use. And everybody hated it. I can't tell you the amount of times I flew to New York to meet with people on my own dime, by the way. It's not like they like wine and dine you.
Right.
Flew to meet, didn't like it. I got to go to Scholastic, which was super cool because it was like all my childhood dreams coming true, like seeing Clifford the Big Red Dog, and like in New York, their carpet is made out of like certain books. Like it's you guys, if you ever get to go, I can't recommend enough. And I love the people there, but again, it wasn't the fit for them. And then JL and I, after like 12 meetings or so, were like, we got to regroup. So we took a break from it for a few months, put together a different idea about like a mindfulness book. I didn't like it. I couldn't get behind it. I tried to like, and then we came up with Are You Okay? And it was just a slow process of like, essentially JL was like, I feel like we're thinking too niche. Let's go broad. Let's just like, what would people, let's start. Cause she was hoping that I'll write more than one book. Now I have, how do we, start out? We should start with like a mental health 101. Right. And yeah, so that's how it came to be.
Is there a book number 3 in the works?
No, I mean, there might be. It's funny. After I wrote the first one, I was like, I'll never do this again. It's too much work, and I get really burnt out. And then you're like, I just start to feel like I'm sure it'll happen again. Where I'm like, I need to create this. Yeah. That's how I felt with Traumatized. I was like, this needs to happen. And so I don't know if it'll be something eating disorder focused. My audience has been asking for that, or I don't know. We'll see. I'll keep you posted.
Cool. We'll be here. Let's see. Trying to think of other things about this. Like I haven't talked about this book a lot in this, and I'm shocked because I have a lot to say. I guess I'll do a quick librarian overview / book talk.
Okay.
So to me, as a librarian, the great thing about Traumatized is that it takes a really heavy topic and it breaks it down in ways that are approachable for everyone, or the vast majority of folks. And like if you look at it, it's not a thick book. It's not like a manual. It's not the DSM, and it's not written like that either. It's written very approachably, and it's for folks who maybe have their own trauma in their life that they're trying to figure out, or folks that they care about who also have trauma in their lives, and maybe trying to understand how they're going through that better. I would say that this would be a really good book to get started with trauma. I found it really easy to read because I have a bit of experience. So I used to work as a victim advocate for victims and survivors of sexual assault. And I did some mental health triage stuff in university. And I think I would have loved to have this book during those times because I could have just given it to the folks that I was working with and been like, let's read this together. Or you should take this and go sit with it. So if you know somebody in your life like that, or if that describes you, this sounds familiar to you, take this book and go read it from your local library or buy a copy wherever your books are sold. The other thing that I really liked about it, like you mentioned, it has lots of quotes, but I really like the bullet points at the end that basically summarize everything that you've talked about in a given chapter, because like it's a lot of information and it's very like written easily, But as with everything, having that just little bit of recap helps you remember, like, oh, that's right, we talked about this. Oh, we talked about that. Oh, here's the takeaways from that. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's funny because sometimes in a chapter I'd naturally be like, oh, this needs key takeaways.
Mm-hmm.
And I sent in my manuscript and my editor's like, there are 4 chapters that don't have, I need those, like we need those. You have to write those. And I was like, oh, he loves the key takeaways. Gotta love Dan. And so anyway, he was like, come up with these. And then he'd read them and he'd be like, you need to add this in too, because that was important for me. And I like that he's part of it too.
Yeah.
And he's the reason that each and every chapter has key takeaways, because he felt that was important. And it is true. It's, even though it's written simply, it's a lot to digest. And I always tell people, don't feel like you have to like burn through any of my books. You can also it's like a buffet, take what you want, leave the rest kind of thing. But give yourself the time to like process what you're reading and digesting, because it can be overwhelming.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier how what was the second chapter became, or what is the
what
second
was the
chapter
first?
Was the first, yeah. And it does read like that a little bit. I will just straight up say like, this is interesting. And it's very useful because it really places it in a historical context. But like once I got to the second chapter, I was like, oh yeah, this is what I'm looking for. So for folks like me who maybe have a little bit of experience in the peripherals of this work, keep that in mind. Still read the first chapter, but if you're reading through the first chapter and like, well, this sounds kind of relatable, but like not super where I'm at, like keep going.
Because the first chapter exists because of the pandemic kind of, and the connectivity of that. And it's funny because I debated whether I'd try to change the introduction of the second chapter, because it is the first chapter, like you feel it. Yeah. It's like, we're just going to get into what is post-traumatic stress disorder? What's shell shock? Why did it come from that? But I was like, no, that's really where it starts. This is like a preamble that's important because of when this is happening. Yeah. But there's also this.
I am super glad though that like in that first chapter you talk about how like not all of the trauma that we experience is necessarily firsthand or secondhand. Like the media has a lot to play with that, like, and how it impacts how we consume information and how we seek out information. I'm like, that's not something necessarily that folks consider.
Yeah. I mean, now that we've had the Facebook whistleblower, you could argue that like, and I would have included that had that happened, back when I was first writing this, because we knew it, right? It's like, I know it, but now we have proof.
Yeah. What are some takeaways that you want folks to have when it comes to your book?
I guess I'd hope that people are able to identify whether or not they themselves have been traumatized and feel like there's useful tools they can take with them to use today. I think that's really key for me, is just hoping that there's at least one tidbit or one story that resonated with you and you're like, oh, and you either feel validated or you feel like you can take that resource and utilize it. That's always really my goal. And then I guess the final thing is I hope it motivates people to reach out and get help, because help exists and it does get better. Like I talk about how we heal and why it works and all of that. And I hope that people leave feeling hopeful.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, there are resources out there, and it can feel hard and isolating after or in the process of being traumatized, but there are folks out there who want to help you. And if you need help finding those resources, Katie has a website, I think.
I do.
What's the URL for that website?
It's just katiemorton.com.
Easy peasy.
Easy peasy.
Or you can pick up this book and give it a read. You can also visit your local library. And so, for example, at my library system, we have categorized Katie Morton's book at 616.8521. So specifically, that ends up being psychology, and self-help is that section, or sociology, basically. And then within that is psychology, and then self-help, and then the smaller decimals after the decimal, Dewey Decimal, are trauma.
Okay.
So if you go to a library and you look up her book or any other books about trauma, they'll all be around each other. But you can also ask a librarian. We are discreet and we are helpful, and we will take our time to find you what you need. Gotta
love the libraries. I always tell people, like, if finances are an issue, reach out to your library.
Yeah.
They can always order some copies, or they might already have them. And that's a great way to to get access.
Yeah, when I put in the purchase order for this, so the way it works is I will put in a request for a title, and that will guarantee that we get at least one. But because the book is what it is, and because the times are what they are, we ended up ordering like 4 or 5 copies.
Oh, yay!
Just
Thanks,
across the
Peter.
system. No worries. Happy to get you that money back. And if you're writing a book, make friends with librarians. But yeah, it's good to have those things, and we will always seek out resources for you. And if we don't have something that we can help you with, we will find somebody who does through the magic of what's called an interlibrary loan, where we'll find a copy of the book that you're looking for at another library, and they'll send it to us for you for free forever.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing, the library system.
Yeah. Any last thoughts before we go? Because we're coming up on that 4:47 time.
Yeah, no, just thanks for having me. And I'm glad you like the book, and I hope it's helpful for people out there. And also, I just think it's so pretty. I was very proud of how this one looked.
Look at how pretty this is, y'all.
Not that you're supposed to judge by the cover, but a cover pulls you in. We all judge by the cover.
I judge by the cover all the time. As a professional, my advice is judge books by the cover.
I know. And I had no say really over the first one.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't, I mean, I was like, I like blue and green, and that's what, but this one I got to pick, and I got to kind of help create. And so I love that.
I love it too. I will say, after reading this and doing some other readings around trauma, that you did inspire me, actually. I've been thinking about going back to school a little bit, and I signed up for an associate certificate around trauma and crisis management.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, so that's going to be starting in January. And then one of my friends is like, I should become a therapist. And I was like, you should. Maybe I should too. Probably not, but we'll see. So I'm starting to look into what the requirements for that are, and it might be not happening because it's just a long process, but who knows?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to be a resource.
Awesome. Well, I'll reach out to you. Micah too, wherever Micah is. We have a comment from Rhiannon Williams who says, I'm really excited to read this book. Sounds like it will be a great read. It will.
Yay. Wonderful. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll call it here. But again, everybody, thank you so much. Oh, I just noticed. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Katie, of course. And I'll talk to you later. And I'll talk to all of you later as well.
Yep, have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.
Bye. And I think that did it.